Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me okay in the room? Perfect, wonderful, thank you. And thank you so much for joining us for the first talk of the day here at Imbibe Live. I'm Millie Milliken. I'm a drinks journalist, among other things, and I'm here with a fabulous panel today to discuss all things censorship when it comes to the drinks market in the UK, but also the kind of cans and can-nots of how to advertise alcohol brands and non-alcohol brands as well. So, as I mentioned, I have a fabulous panel with me. I have Michael Vachon, Rachel Vaughan-Jones and Leandro Cambrini. And I'm going to ask all of you guys to introduce yourselves and just let us know what you do and how it relates to the topic that we're discussing today.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't need to take your mic. So Michael Vachon, co-founder of Maverick Drinks. We've been distributing brands from all over the world into the UK for a little over 10 years now.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Leandro Cambrini, and I run Brisk, a digital marketing agency. So we work with lots of different drinks brands from around the world. And I'm also importing my family's wine from Argentina, so I'm also involved in the drinks industry from that side.
Fabulous, thank you. And Rachel.
And I'm Rachel, and I am the marketing director of Compass Box. But before that, I've also worked extensively with a number of drink startups and challenger brands in the UK.
Perfect, thank you everyone. So as I mentioned today, we're going to be discussing things relating to censorship and advertising. It's a topic that has been spoken about quite a lot this year in the press. And I just wanted to start with a question that might sound quite simple, but why is this topic so important for people who are either marketing or who own a brand today in the UK? Open to the floor. Michael, you go.
Sure, I can go first. So, I mean, I think it's pretty clear we've had a huge resurgence of gin brands in the UK over the past 10 years. Imbibe seems to get bigger every year. There are so many brands and is so much more competitive than it ever has been before that brand is your strongest asset. And if you take that away, it becomes a lot harder to stand out. It becomes a lot harder to make a living doing this, but also, not just the selling of spirits, but there's so many other revenue streams, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. But between merchandise, brand experience, all these things play a huge part in certainly smaller brands being able to build communities around their brands. And take all that away, and everything's basically the same. I don't know that you can really build a brand today without being able to merchandise, advertise, and really shout about your brand in a meaningful way.
Thank you.
I think I'd also add to that, and I agree with everything that's been said, but there's also, as kind of professionals that work in this industry, we also do have kind of a duty of care. There's corporate social responsibility, and whilst we do really want to be marketing our brands and reaching as many consumers as is humanly possible, we do also want to make sure that we're not doing anything that is going to be harmful to kind of consumers. So it's finding that balance between really pushing the boundaries of what's allowed, kind of fighting back against the things that make no sense, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, but also taking a view on what is acceptable to be promoting to consumers and what isn't.
Exactly, yeah. I completely agree with that, and I also think the rules are gray in some areas, but it's important to know them. Just because for like a small mistake that you didn't know that something could be done or something couldn't be done, then maybe you got your ad account suspended or something like that. So you need to know those small little things, and you need to.
And these days there are so many more avenue streams and advertising streams than there's ever been before. Can we sort of have a little chat about? Obviously, there's the traditional ones like print publications, online marketing and advertising. But what are some of the other ways that brands can really reach their buyers at the end of the day?
Andrew, I think this might be for you. You're the digital marketing expert here.
Yeah. Well, in terms of digital marketing, obviously you have lots of different platforms that you can use, and all of them have different policies. So obviously it's very important to know what you can do on TikTok. Sometimes you can do some things on TikTok and you can't do them on Meta or Instagram or Facebook. So I think obviously my area of expertise is digital marketing, so social media is really important. You have email marketing too. That's a little bit more kind of your own channel, so you can do a little bit more there. But obviously, you don't want to be doing illegal things in your email marketing, even if no one else can see them.
I think I always show my age when I say that I remember being a marketer before the time when brands had social media. I remember when that wasn't a thing. It was very traditional. We had, out of home, TV, we had print, and then the digital age came along, thank God, and I think it kind of democratized in a lot of ways and made it possible for kind of a new generation of brands to reach consumers that potentially wouldn't have had the capital before to invest in things like out of home and TV.
And I think as it's getting harder and harder to do some of the marketing digitally and where there are a lot more restrictions on what you can and can't say, I think that's also where we've started to see a big rise in the celebrity brands, because they can just put their face to something, and that is how they can reach millions more without really having to say very much at all.
Yeah, that's another topic
Well,
I
sure.
would love to dig into, probably for more than half an hour as well. But it would be great, Leandro, if we could just go to you. And could you talk us through some of the legalities around sort of digital marketing that there are today, specifically in the UK, if you're a drinks brand?
Yeah, so we have to take into account what is actually legally like the laws of the UK, and then you have different kind of rules for different specific platforms. So in the UK, what you can do, basically, you can't promote alcohol or advertise alcohol to people under 18s, and you have to be socially responsible about that. So you can't say anything that's not responsible, basically. That's the main things. Then you can't say anything around alcohol being, associated with sex, for example, that makes you more attractive or that makes you more confident or things like that, which are kind of the rules that everyone knows. Now, the trickier bits are going into each platform. So, for example, on TikTok, you can advertise alcohol. So you can post about alcohol, but you can't really advertise it. On Meta, for example, you can advertise alcohol, obviously always following the laws of the country where you're advertising. Like, for example, in the Nordics, you wouldn't be able to advertise. In the UK, you can do it. And but you can't use Instagram shops, for example, with an alcohol brand. So you have to use regular ads and then drive people to your website to convert them on your website, and not on Instagram shops. So I think those are really important things to keep in mind.
Brilliant, thank you. And of course, if you're a big brand, if you're one of the big sort of portfolio brands out there, you'll probably have people in-house who are across this legal teams and things like that. But if you're a smaller startup or you're setting up your own business, obviously these things can trip you up probably quite quickly and without you knowing. And Rachel, I know you've worked with sort of SMEs quite a bit in the past. Are there any common mistakes or blind spots or stumbling blocks that you kind of have foreseen for people or seen people come across just by pure accident or not having the knowledge?
I think it's really important to be clear on your messaging and really do your research around what you can and can't say, to Leandro's points, but also looking around at competitors, so making sure that you're not infringing on what anyone else is doing or saying, but also back to Michael's original point, to build a successful brand, you really need to make sure that you're building something that's distinctive, stands on its own, so hopefully you don't want to be infringing on what anyone else is doing for that reason, but it's really key to make sure that that you're not making claims or kind of saying anything about your category that is against the rules. And the great thing is we've got the whole World Wide Web at our fingertips, in our pocket, on our phones. So that would probably be my biggest piece of advice to kind of founders and marketers that are working in these sizes of business, is just really do your research, because on one hand it could damage your brand if you get something wrong, and on the other hand you could be slapped with a fine or have kind of legal action taken against you.
Thank you. And obviously we're talking mainly about the UK here, but Michael, you've worked with brands who have been established in other markets and they're coming into the UK. How does that kind of dance work? How do you kind of bring a brand over and want to have that brand voice and your messaging when maybe working with a different set of rules?
Yeah, I mean, the basic thing we tell all the brands that we work with, because we're a small team, so we don't know all of the laws and all of the regulations. So we usually just try and say, all you can really talk about is taste and how to drink it. If you stick to taste and how to drink it, then you're probably in a safe space.
Yeah.
And so, we emphasize awards as a proxy for taste and quality. and we emphasize kind of cocktail serves over, say, anything that would, drinking it neat or out of the bottle, anything that would encourage, say, excess, we would steer away from.
Yeah.
And so it's cocktails and how to drink it. Cocktails and how it tastes.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
And if we stay in that realm, we're probably in a good, safe space.
I mean, you kind of think those are the two most important things at the end of the day. Really, that's why people are buying your product.
Sure, and we like to show different occasions for people drinking them, but that's really still falls under the how to drink it realm. Anything outside of that, we just tell our brands it's just not worth even trying to adapt that here.
Yeah.
Let's steer clear.
Perfect, thank you. And there are certain times in most years in this industry where an incredible marketing campaign comes out or something very clever that a brand has done to market themselves to maybe not sidestep certain things, but to promote themselves in a really clever way. What are some examples that you've seen of brands who have done something really interesting or clever with their marketing that has meant that they've stayed on the right side of either rules, regulations, or just making sure people are drinking responsibly?
I think, and I guess one of the reasons why I've sort of firmly planted myself in the challenger brand space is because I love the fact that these aren't brands with huge budgets. You can go and do, all of the traditional advertising out there. They have to really think outside of the box. That will become a pun when you see the example I'm going to use. Very good. So it means that these challenger brands are really thinking of new and interesting ways to kind of reach consumers outside of the traditional channels. And a really nice example of a brand that does this really well is Lelo. A boxed wine brand.
They're brilliant. They're brilliant.
Traditionally we wouldn't recommend kind of comparing your brand directly to another brand in terms of taste through traditional advertising channels. But what those guys did was they got out in the streets, they set up their product, they set up kind of leading competitors' product, blind tasting, got people to taste test, and then kind of revealed to those people that actually the product that they were preferring was not the leading kind of competitor. It was their own, I think it was their rosé that they were tasting. And I think it's things like that which allow you to land messages around taste in a really engaging way, and in a way that potentially if you were to run a whole ad campaign saying like, we are better than X brand, you would get into a bit of trouble. But doing things in the real world and being a bit more kind of guerrilla with your activity means that you can kind of push the boundaries a bit.
And also the fact that they're sort of bag-in-box wine as well, maybe the preconceptions around that as why you might be drinking that kind of wine, it completely subverts it. Yeah, it's brilliant. Michael, have you got any examples?
Well, my example actually comes from Compass Box.
I can't take any credit. I've only been there for 2 months.
Yeah. Well, and we're talking about the balance between what is regulation and what you can and can't say versus censorship. And I know that the two kind of go hand in hand, and then this would lean on the regulation side, but a few, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I loved Compass Box released a 3-year-old deluxe whiskey. It was a whiskey that had over 20-year-old whiskey, and it was a little subtle dig at the Scotch Whisky Association, who say, if you have 3-year-old whiskey in the blend, you can only call it 3-year-old whiskey. Now this was about 5 mil 3-year-old and 695 mil 20-some-year-old whiskey. But as a marketing exercise, they called it 3-year-old deluxe. And everybody knew that it was a 20-plus-year-old whiskey. But they were staying within the confines of the law and regulation and what they can and cannot say about what else is in the blend.
Yeah.
And it was mostly because Compass Box wanted to be transparent, but they actually couldn't, they weren't allowed to be transparent about what's in it, which I thought was a really, just a wonderful way of staying within the law, but also pointing out that the law doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and I think if you're really clever with it, you can do things like that, which will then result in amazing PR coverage, right? The kind of things that you can be said about what you're doing in PR are probably kind of less restrictive versus what you can say as a brand. And another great Compass Box example is last vatted malt. So when the Scotch Whisky Association changed all the rules and regulations about naming conventions, you could no longer call it last vatted malt. Compass Box were like, okay, this is silly, but what are we going to do? We're going to release a product on the final day before you can produce anything that has this messaging on it called last vatted malt, and released it and got the conversation going. So that is kind of another way of using I guess, product innovation to really kind of get around some of the rules or maybe poke a little bit of fun at the rules and kind of get people talking.
While also being transparent as well, which is what people at the end of the day want you to be with your messaging. Leandro, any examples from your side?
I have a very good example actually that we haven't discussed yet, but it's about CBD. So CBD, a CBD brand called Trip, you've probably seen the ads everywhere. They're there, we're going to meet them later. So basically on Meta, on Instagram, Facebook, you can't advertise CBD. So what they did is something really, really clever. So on their can, you can see that it says like CBD drink or something like that. So they just removed all of any mention of CBD. They have the same can, but it doesn't say CBD anymore. And Meta, in that case, they let you advertise it. And obviously you can say CBD anywhere in the caption or in the text, in the copy, and not even in the landing page. So if you click on an ad, you go to their landing page, you will see that the first page that you can see doesn't have any mention of CBD at all, even though it's a massive, CBD brand. So that's a way that you can get basically Facebook to accept and approve your ads and drive people to your website without really mentioning CBD. Obviously, you can also use other products, like, for example, merchandise or things like that to get your brand out there, and you're still not talking about CBD, so it's all good. I think
it's fascinating, and that brings me on to the next question. I thought, obviously, we're probably mainly talking about alcohol here, but obviously in the last 5 to 10 years, other brands, especially in the non-alc space, are coming into our world, which is fantastic, but that also brings with it another set of regulations and censorship and whether you can put CBD on things as well. How have you guys sort of seen that from your background or any of the drinks brands that you've worked with or seen on the market when you've been just sort of looking around or coming to shows? How have you seen that space kind of coming in, and have you seen anything interesting that's happening as well?
I think this really raises a good point about, a lot of the challenges we face are often regulations and censorship that come as a result of rules and regulations that come from kind of government policies, which don't always make a lot of sense. And I'm sure we're going to come on to some of the specifics around that. But I think non-alc is the perfect example where, in the UK, 0.5%, you still have to call it out. You can't say that is alcohol-free, but in Europe, 0.5% and under is classed as alcohol-free. You don't need to call it out. And I think it just makes it really confusing for consumers to know, what is and isn't kind of okay to be drinking if you're, for example, following an alcohol-free lifestyle. And I think that then means that you need to be a lot cleverer in your messaging and kind of in the advertising that you're creating to make sure that consumers understand and do that education piece.
Thank you. Anyone else got any comment on that?
I think it's really important to say that anything we say today may change in 3 months or in 6 months. So you always need to be having a look at, what Meta is saying, what they are releasing. Well, new products come, like when CBD started to gain more, traction, they just said you can't advertise anymore. So obviously that things can change, and it's important to just be on the loop and just be connected,
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
Okay.
I know you mentioned, Rachel, we're going to come on to some of the things that are maybe discussed or mooted, and it's decisions made by maybe a government. And obviously you previously did work and then you moved out of it slightly, but you're back in the whiskey industry and the marketing side of that. And earlier this year, probably one of the biggest stories was in Scotland, the suggestion of banning alcohol advertising, and that kind of spanned numerous things from print advertising to merchandise, and that could have huge sort of ramifications for the industry. It's kind of slightly been swallowed by the deposit return scheme at the moment in terms of coverage, but what are your thoughts in terms of what something like that could have as an impact, and also how the industry has reacted to it based on kind of how it's even come about through maybe not the industry?
Yeah, I mean, that was a kind of huge thing that would have kind of unprecedented impact on the brands that, particularly brands that are, Scotch-based and are based in Scotland, sorry. And, to kind of elaborate on what Millie was saying, it's like even things like having, branded merch that you can buy when you go to a distillery tour. So you've already spent the money and the time as a brand recruiting that person to come to your distillery for a visitor experience, and then when they leave, you can't sell them things that then they would go on to kind of do the advocacy part for your brand. So this really was a kind of legislation that could have impacted the whole consumer funnel, and it would have been really damaging for all the brands that were trying to build a home there. So I'm really pleased to see that it seems to no longer be on the agenda. It feels like this is one thing that has people have maybe seen sense over, but as Michael stated at the very start of this conversation, building a brand is the key to success. Like, you need to be able to get as many people as possible to know about your brand. You want to make it famous, and if you cannot advertise it across any touch point, then how are you supposed to reach people? There's a small part of me that's kind of like, I'd love to see the innovation and the creativity that would come as a result of that, but I think that's a very extreme way to encourage people to be creative.
Yeah, and it's something that I think when I was reading press about it and coverage, it was sort of off the back of the success, shall we say, of what happened in the tobacco industry, and that kind of leads me on to, we've got 5 minutes left, but I'm going to try and get these 2 final points in because I think they're really important and interesting. Something that you've spoken about before, Michael, which is the idea of white labelling products as well, and something that the tobacco industry did to try and reduce people leading a lifestyle where they were smoking. Again, what kind of ramifications could that have on a marketeer's kind of job and a brand's success?
I mean, I think white labeling is crazy. The idea, and it comes up probably every 5 years or so, it kind of rears its head again and then dies just quickly, which I'm thrilled to see. White labeling, I mean, in cigarettes, there's, brand loyalty has just been eroded over the past 10 years here. And what's also happened is you've got replacement things come up like e-cigarettes that just come in and fill that gap where the legislation doesn't apply to anymore. So you get brands which will pop up in adjacent categories, which I think would probably find a way in alcohol. But also in the meantime, people just gravitate towards the cheapest stuff because everything looks the same. There's no way of really identifying, short of doing a bit of research, what differentiates one brand from another. So the whole impact of white labeling would, in my mind, just drive people to drink poorer quality things, probably in greater excess because it's cheaper, and actually be totally to the detriment of what they're trying to achieve by white labeling. So I couldn't be happier to see that die every time it comes up.
Excellent. Let's hope that continues to happen. And just going sort of full circle back to actually something that Rachel said at the beginning of there's this dichotomy between kind of marketing and advertising the brands that we are selling, but also having a moral responsibility to our consumer and making sure that we are advertising in a responsible way. Leandro, I know this is something that you are very passionate about. Can you just sort of maybe explain what that dichotomy is and how we can maybe rational it to ourselves and make sure that we're doing the best on both sides?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think at the end of the day, talking specifically about alcohol, not about CBD or other things, but we are advertising something that can kill people, so we need to be careful about how we promote it and how we talk about it. And I think in the end, what we want is people to not drink. I mean, unless, I don't know, some people want people to drink a lot of wine, cheap wine, or cheap drinks, but we want to elevate, people to spend a little bit more. So we want to educate them about drinking higher quality and drinking less, drinking more in moderation. And I think that's something that we have to do as marketers of alcohol.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. An excellent note to end on, I think. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Right in front. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. No.
Hi, thank you everyone for talking today. I just wanted to ask, because I still find it very grey. We follow the Portsman Group, but we obviously advertise here, we're in Portugal, we're in Germany, we're about to launch in Ibiza, so obviously different countries, different rules. But the one thing that I still don't know, because some brands do it and you don't, but I think it's a no, is on social media showing someone actually drink the drink. They say hold it by your mouth, hold it in your hand, but you shouldn't actually show them drinking it. So I just wanted to find out is that grey, or is there actually a definite yes, no, or what do you say about it?
I think you can. I mean, there are lots of gray areas again, because sometimes there are some illegal things that obviously the UK says you can't do, but then I've seen people doing them on Meta, and Meta doesn't figure out until like when they figure out. Maybe they are running an ad for like 2 months and then no one said anything. I think the law says that you can't show anyone having a drink, but like acting as it gives them, like this makes them more brave, or it makes them more attractive, as I was saying before. So I'm guessing, this is a guess again, because Meta is there's no one, you can't call them and ask them. So it's like I would say you are probably able to do it as long as you're not showing people like drinking a lot, or like intoxicated, or showing alcohol as one of those things that you can't legally do.
But I guess my question would be, do you need to? If just people having a glass, holding it, is probably just as strong as them actually physically moving the glass to their mouth.
So I think it's more like if you did like a story, right? Like, hey, what do you... Sorry, like if you do a story and you had to say, hey, what do you think of this? Or like, for us example, Watch Shot, it's got a secret botanical in that creates a tingle. So it's hold it in your mouth 1 or 2 seconds, then swallow. So we also have to educate followers or future people how to do it, how to drink it. So I kind of like cut the story and I'm like, boom, boom. So you get from finish to end, but you don't ever see someone go, ooh, like, and then see that they actually didn't pull a face. No disrespect, but no tequila face kind of thing, And I don't want to obviously get a fine to the company. So I just kind of want to cross that kind of thing, like an activation, like, you had a festival or something, like, oh, what do you think? And, the DJ or someone throws it back. So more like the social side of it, not like the actual advertising.
Yeah.
But,
I think there's also a bit of a sort of using kind of common sense a little bit, and being like, if, as Leandro's saying, if you're not showing anyone kind of drunk, getting sexier, being more confident, doing anything that we know logically we shouldn't be depicting alcohol having that effect on them. It's kind of like, particularly on stories, it's like a bit of, just see what happens. You're not kind of doing anything that rationally is silly. And my motto sometimes is not, I'm not going to sign my name to this to anyone, it's kind of ask for forgiveness and not permission. So if it's something like that, personally I'd be like, well, let's just try it out. And if anyone flags it, then we know, we learn. You're not doing anything that is like crazy. And if someone says, you can't show that, you'd be like, I'm really sorry, I didn't know. Is there anywhere I can find out this information for the future? And just don't do it again.
And this is, it's good to recognize that the Portman Group is not a legally binding group. It's you don't want to draw the ire of them, but they are a advisory body, so they can tell you really shouldn't do that, and you should probably listen to them, but they're not a legally binding body, so probably wouldn't get in legal trouble for doing it. He says, not a lawyer.
Off the record, right?
Yeah.
Ask the legal department.
Anyone else quickly with any questions before we wrap up?
Actually, like a website online, like an advertising website that actually deal with the regulation and the rules that you can look upon.
Yeah, any helpful resources?
There is the ASA website, which is kind of like that. That you will see the UK regulation, but obviously you have different regulations for like Meta and for TikTok. So you have to, or for Google or wherever you're advertising, you have to check those terms and conditions and rules they have in place.
And also another good place to look sometimes is like do a bit of stalking on Facebook Ads Library, which is where you can see what any account is posting, all the ads they have live across Meta. You can search by the handle of the brand and it shows you anything they have live, and you can generally get a sense if you are a gin brand and you search for all the big gin brands and then no one is doing that thing and it seems like there's a reason why it's not there. That's also a good way sometimes to like sense check things.
Yeah, definitely.
Perfect. Anyone else before we wrap up? Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Thank you.
And thank you to my wonderful panel for taking the time as well. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, Millie.